one of the fundamental originators of the emotionality behind current politics is the new technology that's available to us as individuals, as organizations, and as national organizations to persuade voters. And so the social media is the worst culprit in this area. Social media is immediately useful for deception, persuasion, for ill, and attacks, anonymous attacks. So it just creates this environment where it's totally permissible to go after your adversary in the darkest way possible. So social media, I think, is really one of the most fundamental problems we're facing in terms of societal discord and emotionality of politics. And that's backed up now, I think, by new artificial intelligence capabilities. And these are not being talked about sort of at the general level, but the agentic AI that is available now especially can create political attack campaigns. It can create accounts online. It can initiate the attack. It can go after the adversary. Generative AI can be integrated to create the content that's useful for these political attacks. And these systems enable the user to do this at scale extraordinarily cheaply. So,
Hi, let's welcome JD Maddox, former CIA Special Operations Officer and advisor to the Secretary of Homeland Security, as well as professor, author, and vice president at Def9 Solutions. Welcome to the show, sir, and good to see you.
thank you. Thanks for having me, Dan. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Let's start with your background. You have an incredibly impressive resume. How did you become who you are? Maybe, as far as I understand, you joined the Army first, and then you switched to CIA, and then the Department of State, and then Homeland Security, and so on. So, what led you to this journey, and how you joined all of these organizations?
Yeah. Difficult question to answer. I think that there are sort of many reasons that we get into what we get into, and that they probably varied over the decades that I was doing what I've done. But in any case, I am an Army brat. So everybody in my family has served in one way or another. My father was a four-star general. My brother is a colonel. My other brother was a lieutenant. The list goes on. But in any case, we all felt a sense of duty, I think, and the U.S. military, especially the Army, was the way that we pursued that duty. And I went to St. John's College in Annapolis, Maryland, which is they call it the Great Books School. And so at St. John's, you study all of the original Western canon, everything from Socrates through Einstein, everything in between. And it's not just literature and philosophy. You're doing hard math, hard sciences, all of that great stuff. Really intensive program. But the intent of the program in my mind was to understand truth. So how do we understand truth? How do we approach it? What is truth? And how do we express it in our lives? And it's a very complicated thing to answer. And you don't answer it in one 4-year program. You answer it through making mistakes in life and through experimenting in life and figuring out what that truth is. So when I was given the opportunity to join the Army, one of the MOSs, the specialties that I had the option of choosing, was psychological operations. And I just thought that that would be an incredible way to understand some of the realities that we're dealing with, because in order to do psychological operations, you have to have a command of the issue that you're dealing with, and you have to be able to maneuver around that issue. So jumped into psychological operations. It was a fascinating path, and I really enjoyed it. But eventually, I had to get out of my training unit because I moved out to Las Vegas, where I took work as an equivalent special operations kind of role for the Department of Energy, where they have the nuclear emergency support team. They go looking for lost, stolen, and broken nuclear devices and components. So I was part of them, and then came back eventually to where I joined the Office of Intelligence within Department of Energy. And that sort of took me on this intelligence path, also a means of sort of understanding the truth. I think that being part of the intelligence community gives you this incredible insight into the truths that you're dealing with very practically. And you do have a sense that you're sort of opening the screen on some truths that others might not be able to have access to. So it's a pretty exciting line of work. And so I did that at Department of Energy, and I moved over to Department of Homeland Security, where I supported the Homeland Security Secretary, both Ridge and Chertoff, helping them with all of their intelligence and operational briefings every single morning. And then working in support of the US Congress, helping them with the same thing, not on a daily basis, but a less frequent basis, briefing the Congress on intelligence and operations for Homeland Security. And then I was swept up by the Central Intelligence Agency. They asked me to come apply. And so I did, and I was thrilled to be part of it. This was at the height of the so called global war on terrorism. So being part of that was extraordinary and took me forward. But throughout, and eventually I took a position much later as one of the leaders of the Global Engagement Center at the U.S. Department of State. And so I've looked at the the issue of national security from the Department of Defense, from the intelligence community, and from the Department of State, or as a diplomat. And so I have this, what I think is a fairly unusual take on national security and the issue of the fascination that I have with truth and discerning it. And so, yeah, that's some background on how I wound up uh, at the State Department last. And I got out in 2018, started my own company. And now I'm also part of DEF9, where I serve as their vice president for innovation and technology. And I'm also a professor, as you mentioned, at Tulane University and George Mason University, focused on disinformation and focused on open source information analysis. That's very long winded. It's quite a pathway. Haven't met many people who have sort of bumped around throughout as many agencies as I have. But I do think there's a consistent thread there, which is going after the truth, trying to understand and discern truth from fiction, but also this role in information operations, which has really been the cornerstone of my career as a psychological operations team leader, as a CIA branch chief, and at the Department of State, always focused on information operations, either how you present the US position to global audiences and to adversaries, or how you defend against adversarial messaging and its impact on the US and its impact on troops and personnel. So that's it, Danny.
Oh, great story, great stories. An interesting transition from an advisor to Secretary of Homeland Security to CIA, because basically you were to a certain degree a public person in Homeland Security. So people knew you. You probably didn't have to be confirmed by the Senate, but still you worked with Congress and things like that. Was that an issue at all when joining the CIA that your name was already out there, or your role at the CIA didn't require any kind of secrecy or anything?
I was an overt employee at the CIA. So, the CIA has overt and covert employees, or undercover versus overt employees. And I was overt. So I did not have to hide who I was to the world. Of course, there are always classification methods and protections on what we were doing for individual projects. But I, as an individual, was able to expose who I was, although I wouldn't tell many people.
Yeah. And what was your, in your opinion, like looking back in the past 25, 30 years of your career, what was the most meaningful role that you've held over the years, whether it was in the army or maybe in some of these departments, maybe something that you've enjoyed the most, or maybe something that fulfilled you the most?
Yeah, I think there are some roles that I can't talk about, unfortunately, especially with my time in the intelligence community. But the one I can talk about is my role at the Global Engagement Center, which was the center at the Department of State, which was intended to counter foreign malign influence. At its origins, the Global Engagement Center was called something else. It was the Center for Strategic Counterterrorism Communications. And that effort was intended to centralize all of the US's and even allies, if possible, communications against terrorist organizations. And at the time, Al Qaeda and the terrorist group Daesh, or the Islamic State, Al Qaeda was sort of descending and ISIS was ascending, yeah, as threats. And so we were in a position where we had to very quickly and very smartly devise new capabilities to counter that messaging. It was I think, the highest pressure I had felt, public pressure that I had felt in a job, because we were asked to do something that essentially was impossible, and we were given almost no resources to do the job. And so we had extraordinary successes doing what we were doing, such as encouraging members of Daesh to abandon the group. And we could show that quantifiably how we were having successes. But we were caught in such a media and political trap that it was impossible to succeed in the long term. So eventually, the organization was turned into the Global Engagement Center, and its mission was broadened to include state actors, China, Russia, and others. But for the moment of that I had to do that work at the CSCC, I thought it was absolutely fascinating. First of all, sort of intellectually, but also really gratifying to have those effects on a terrifying adversary. And I wish that we had had more time and resources to have some of those successes.
Hmm. And going back to what you were talking about at the start of the show, this idea of understanding the truth and how you tried to seek this understanding as you were progressing through your career. What can you share about like about this? Because my understanding is that you were like trying to figure out what was the truth behind all this, and then you've served in the CIA and Homeland Security and then Department of State. Now, with all of that experience, what is the truth, or maybe some parts of it that you wasn't aware of that you can now share with the public?
I think, the deep and awful truth of our existence is that we're humans, Danny. We're subject to failure. We misrepresent. We're liars. We're cheats. We're scandalous. All of us as humans, and we cannot separate that from our assessment of reality. And that's the truth of it. I think though that what I've learned over decades of doing this is that, particularly right now, the highest form of leadership is discerning the truth and telling the truth. That sounds very basic, but I think right now in our human experience as Americans, that is probably one of the most difficult things we can do. We are surrounded by misinformation and disinformation, unintentional and intentional. It's coming from all sources of information that we consume, and it's extraordinarily difficult for the individual to discern between what is truth and what is fiction. And it's very difficult and it's doubly difficult for that individual to represent that truth, to expose that truth to the world. And that is something I think not a lot of people are talking about. I've seen a number of your podcast interviews, and a lot of people are talking about leadership in the moment of combat or leadership in a small unit environment. And that has to do with sort of the mechanics of leadership, how you lead, how you represent as a leader, which is absolutely essential to getting through a firefight. And I agree with all of that. But I think the real challenge right now for Americans in the national security structure is knowing the truth and representing the truth. That is the highest form of leadership right now. And the people who are doing that are often chastised, or they're often punished for doing that sort of really gutsy leadership. So it's a different environment than I think we've experienced to date.
Yeah, and as a person who tries to figure out media, I've learned that unfortunately, unless you join the left or the right and you're like just push the agenda, your content, whether it's X, Twitter, or whatever it is not going to be promoted on social media. People are just not going to be interested because people aren't looking for unity. People are looking for something that stirs their emotions, and it's much easier to do that when you push some specific agenda, whether it's truthful or not. So it seems like in this day and age with social media, truth is secondary, and what really moves people is are these like this breaking news or whatever it is that just makes you feel excited or angry or whatever emotion it tries to stir. So do you see a similar problem? And how can we promote unity in America in this political climate, as well as, the state of technology and AI and all of these things that divide us even further?
Uh, tough question to answer. So yes, I see the same problem. So I ran for the state legislature in Virginia a few years ago, and my entire goal was to find compromise. So I wanted to bring together both parties, the voters of both parties, and demonstrate to them that there was a way to approach politics that was not toxic, it was not divisive, but instead was this opportunity to find compromise and to find mutual solutions, mutual advantages through those solutions. What I found though was exactly what you're describing. I would go to a meeting, a political meeting with especially the Republican Party at the time, and I would, propose these concepts of compromise and bipartisanship. And at the end of the meeting, I remember one particular meeting, a woman approached me and said, I think your ideas are great. I just want you to fight. So, I mean, it really is an emotional activity. We're no longer really engaging intellectually with the problems that we are encountering. We're engaging emotionally with those problems. And so the solutions are emotional. But I think that the political structure is built for conflict. We have essentially developed a system that is broken in two, and bipartisanship is more feverish than ever. But the factors that are going into that, the sort of the background on it, things like religious truths, entrepreneurial truths, judicial truths. These all sort of feed this political problem that we're all encountering. So very difficult to break down. I don't have hope in the immediate future that someone is going to arise as sort of a savior figure for US politics. I think that person would be quickly shot down. And instead, I think there's going to be more political fighting among the parties and among those voters in the near term until a real person of charisma comes along who can demonstrate that compromise is possible and that they represent both sides of the equation. I mean, really, we don't have political parties. We have emotional parties. And that's really significant. The people who are running for office are appealing to emotion. They're not appealing to truly ingrained political sensitivities. The Republican Party, it's arguable, today's Republican Party is the Democratic Party of 10 years ago. And that's ironic, right? But it just means to me that the positions, the political positions, aren't as meaningful as the emotional positions. So you've got to have an emotionally charged, charismatic individual to come along and turn this around. But I haven't seen that person. I don't know who that is. So very difficult question, Danny.
Yeah, and it's interesting to explore why this is happening because we've had the two-party system ever since the end of the Civil War. Even before that, basically, there always were two parties, but the modern Republicans and Democrats have dominated the political landscape for 160 years now. But it seems like the division has been growing for the past whatever 20, 30 years, maybe even longer than that. Is it the consequence of technology or maybe foreign influence or maybe some natural developments in society where this division grows? Because like looking back at the first half of the 19th century, it was clear why there was the difference between the North and the South. It was fundamental difference in how they saw the value of human life and then the economy and things like that. But now it seems to be more complicated, and there is no single wall that separates these two movements. So why do you think this is happening? And maybe diving into that, we can figure out how to reverse this course.
I like that. It's a very hopeful. So my experience, running for the legislature was that, when you run for office, you are dealing with numbers. And if you don't recognize the simplicity and the significance of those numbers, you're not going to win. If the numbers aren't in your favor already when you start running, you're very unlikely to win anyway. So in my case, I did not win, but I knew I wasn't going to win. I wanted to make a statement again in favor of compromise and bipartisanship. But uh, you know, the numbers were so low for my party in my district that it was literally impossible to win. So, and the same is true at the state and national scale, not for me, but for politics in general. So we have created a system where, the districts are gerrymandered enough that the split is almost impossible to overcome. And we have created a system of representation to the Congress and the Senate, which is totally disproportionate with the populations in certain states. So, and that's probably not going to be solved in the very near term, but people are aware of it and it comes up in national dialogue occasionally. Should we increase the number of Congress people in certain areas, or should there really be only limited numbers of senators per state? Should there be more states? These are numbers questions, and I think that there's inflexibility about those numbers questions because it obviously favors one party or another. So it's very difficult to overcome.
Yeah, very, very, very interesting. But do you think that the situation has worsened in the past couple of decades, or was it like that since the beginning?
I think the numbers problem has been pretty consistent, but I think that the emotionality of politics is peaking, right? So, people are even using the words civil war. I think that's totally inappropriate and it's really corrosive. But, it is an indicator that people are receptive to the idea of open conflict as opposed to peaceful politicking. And that's tragic. But I think what has happened really one of the fundamental originators of the emotionality behind current politics is the new technology that's available to us as individuals, as organizations, and as national organizations to persuade voters. And so the social media is the worst culprit in this area. Social media is immediately useful for deception, persuasion, for ill, and attacks, anonymous attacks. And it just creates this environment where it's totally permissible to go after your adversary in the darkest way possible. So social media, I think, is really one of the most fundamental problems we're facing in terms of societal discord and emotionality of politics. And that's backed up now, I think, by new artificial intelligence capabilities. And these are not being talked about sort of at the general level, but they're technologies that are available now. The agentic AI that is available now, especially, it can create political attack campaigns. It can create accounts online. It can initiate the attack. It can go after the adversary. Generative AI can be integrated to create the content that's useful for these political attacks. And these systems enable the user to do this at scale extraordinarily cheaply. So now we're in a position where you can multiply the effects that we've seen in social media through the use of AI. So I think we're entering a new era of toxicity. But I have one bit of hope about that, which is that I'm hearing more and more people say they're done. They are done with social media. They're done with technology-based communications. They want more human contact. They want analog. They want a paper library, that sort of thing. So I think that sounds like we're going backwards, but I think in fact it's a call for more human contact and a call for overcoming the technologically fed toxicity of our political structure right now.
And before we finish the episode, do you have a final message you want to share with the listeners, maybe to Americans who are also anxious about the current political environment and the division, maybe something that you want to share with them?
Yeah. So I teach about disinformation and I teach about open source information. And I've engaged in countering disinformation and countering propaganda for decades. And what I've found is that when you have a one on one human conversation with someone, they have a very hard time representing a false position. They have a very hard time representing the disinformation that they've fallen for. Those human conversations are the antidote to what we're experiencing as Americans right now, politically and socially. Go out and meet your neighbor, hug your neighbor, shake their hand, pet their dog or cat. Make sure you're having that human contact because that is the antidote to what we're experiencing. Get out of your basements, get off your PlayStation. Just get out there and do the basic human thing. Go be part of a congregation. Go be part of a knitting club. Go join a poker club. Do something human. Make some mistakes, and you'll be a better person for it, and so will your society around you.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing this and all of the stories and advice today. Great show, great episode, and appreciate your coming to the show today.
Thank you, Danny.
Thank you.